What's up, guys? This is Hyce, and today we're going to do another Hyce Reacts video. This time it is for Union Pacific's Last of the Giants, which is a film that they shot in the late 50s, if I had to guess, specifically talking about everything Big Boy, the history of where the locomotive came from, how it was developed, the Union Pacific superpower stuff in general, and then of course showing some behind the scenes stuff of them being maintained and worked on, and it's just a fantastic video. Like I said, put out in probably the late 50s. I used to have a VHS of this when I was a kid. It was one of my favorite things to watch, so without further ado, let's take a look at Last of the Giants. Fun that they hooped up the orders. Hooped up the title card. Oh, before we get too far in, because this always seems to be a comment on these types of things, I'll post the original down below if you want to watch it without me yakking over the top of it, but that is kind of the purpose of what we're doing here. Put the shovel down.
For more than a century, the haunting voice of the Iron Horse echoed across the land. From the eastern seaboard, over the seemingly endless plains, and through the western mountains, steam locomotives fused a sprawling landmass into a solid nation. Theirs was a call to dreamers of every age, wafting them from humdrum schoolroom or office to fancied adventures on the high iron. Lucky the boy who one day could say he had seen them in action, for by 1960 the age of steam had virtually ended, and the thrill of seeing a mammoth engine at work was to be only a happy memory of childhood. Of all the locomotives in the long history of the rails, one of the greatest was called Big Boy, a name by which the world knew an engine that closed a memorable era in Western railroading. It was the last of the giants. Built as machines to produce transportation, steam locomotives seldom were endowed with grace of line, and then never at the sacrifice of efficiency and power or speed. For those who ran them and serviced them, the 25 engines of our 4000 class climaxed American steam freight locomotive design. So Big Boy was a railroad man's everyday working tool. But it had romantic aspects, too, in the dreams of those grown-up youths who, as bankers or teachers or house painters, secretly yearned to trade places with the engineer in his cab.
So, before it gets a little further along, one thing that I really do appreciate about this video, compared to a lot of other historic filmed things of steam locomotives in action back in the day, is that the sound quality is pretty good, and it seems like it's actually the sound, it's not dubbed in post. A lot of the film stuff of the Rio Grande is either no sound whatsoever, or the sound quality is not very good, or it's dubbed over in post. So to actually hear one of these machines doing the thing is pretty cool. So definitely appreciate that. Although I say that, and then this feels like it's dubbed over audio.
The sight of Big Boy fighting the grades of Wyoming Sherman Hill was, to these aficionados, a picture more treasured than any in the world's galleries. The shattering sounds from its stacks and the moan of its chime whistle more stirring than any concert hall melody. Rugged and powerful, it was on call around the clock.
Look at that leak on that thing off the side.
Around the calendar to ride a trail of steel as it drew bales and boxes and carloads of the world's goods from east to west.
This one's so much worse. The amount of steam that is coming out the side, obviously it's cold and that really makes steam pretty obvious, but it's just like, wow, this was the end of steam, wasn't it?
East again. although its evolution began a century and a quarter before the music of this machine ever rang through Utah's Weber Canyon or drummed across the Rocky Mountain Plateau, Big Boy's true ancestors were more recent. Locomotives like Big Boy were products of grueling schedules versus little engines. When business surged ahead in the West around the turn of the century, railroads serving that territory.
Here's a fun detail. First of all, I do love this shot of the doubleheader, and when they start taking off, it's fantastic. But a lot of times, and we've brought this up a couple different times. I haven't done a video specifically on it, but these boards up by the stack are train boards. And we can see here that this is the locomotive 6537, but it's X2295, which, if I had to guess, that's probably the other locomotive that they put on the train. Yeah. So this is the road engine of this doubleheader. It's the one that is, closest to the cars is the road engine, and then the helper is added on top. And we can tell it's an extra train, a non-scheduled, non-timetabled train, because of the designation on those train boards. And it's always designated as whatever the road engine is. So this train is extra 2295, which is extra what the road engine's number is, which is fun to see. I haven't noticed that detail before.
A train had long been met by adding another locomotive. Double heading saved time on urgent freight, but it also meant investment in extra locomotives. Expensive machines whose periods of usefulness were subject to the rise and fall of business.
That's cool. In that shot, you could see the whistles
grand sight to see a pair of
deflector for the noise for the fireman and engineer.
To the tune of out-of-beat exhausts.
I think that sounds dubbed over because the chuffs are not matching.
This perky museum piece with its 6 churning driving wheels was new in 1890. It was considered a Samson of the rails. But that was not enough, even then, and soon 6 drivers grew to 8. Then 8 became 10. As more feet were added to the iron horse.
I want to say I've heard somewhere, and this is me maybe remembering something wrong, but I'm pretty sure that this shot specifically with the 210-2, and this is the one that survives. It's actually being rebuilt at Silva's. It's just being shoved, and they've just got some fire burning in the box to just make some smoke, but it was totally out of service at this point. So maybe the audio is dubbed over. It's just dubbed over very well.
Larger cylinders were needed to power them. More steam was needed to work the cylinders.
And this one's fun to see because it's got young valve gear.
Iron horse. Larger cylinders were needed to
It's
power
got
them.
kind of a goofy arrangement up there, which is fun to watch.
In this jack-built house on wheels, a larger boiler to supply the steam. More power brought more weight, which, though it aided traction by pressing the drivers to the rail, required more wheels to distribute it.
If you ever wanted a demonstration of hammer blow, that was it.
The longer the locomotive grew, the more it became like a centipede with a stiff neck. It had difficulty following tracks that wound with rivers and mountains. Size also was limited by bridges and tunnels designed for the smaller locomotives and cars that had been adequate in the early days. The same problem came up on European railroads. One answer to the power and size spiral was found by a Frenchman, Anatole Mallet. Far from being a comic character, Mallet was a brilliant engineer. In 1889, he built a flexible locomotive.
If only it was that easy.
Short engine units, then joined their frames with a hinge pin. An extra pair of cylinders was added to drive the rear unit. A large boiler completed the design. Voila! The railroad world had here a new and useful piece of equipment. It bent in the middle to take curves freely.
The animation's fun.
Being hinged or articulated, engines could be made longer, with more wheels to distribute the weight that was the partner of power. The first Mallet used in America, one which railroaders affectionately called Old Maud, ran on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad.
First to do everything.
The Virginian and Erie railroads went Mallet one better and built locomotives with 3 engine units.
I don't know if you could say one better. I think that's not terribly true.
Powerful brutes, but steam-hungry and hard to maintain. Mallet engines like Old Maud also were of the economical compound type. They used the steam twice. It came from the boiler first to the rear set of cylinders at high pressure. Then, as it expanded, it passed at lower pressure into a second and larger set before exhausting through the smokestack. In 1918, we put a number of Mallets to work on heavy grades. True to type with bulging front cylinders, these engines did a good job of pulling, but they were slow movers and hard on track. The moving parts of the front units were so large and heavy that at higher speeds the track suffered continuous and devastating hammering. Like
the ominous music over that section's pretty funny. It's like, yes, the hammer blow of the Mallet. It's always fun to see the original type of Mallet where the cylinders on the front are just gigantic. And they did that, of course, because the steam was at a lower pressure, having been exhausted and expanded through the first set of cylinders already. So in order to keep the force output about the same between the two of them, they simply made the cylinders way bigger. And that, comes with bigger pistons, comes with bigger rods, with more counterweights. That's exactly what they're talking about there. And they were not kind to track. That's very true.
Most Western railroads, power lines stretch over long distances, and speed is essential to maintain good service. To get both the power and speed we needed, we returned in the mid-20s to the rigid frame engine.
The coolest choo-choos of all time.
A locomotive of singular design. With 12 coupled driving wheels, it was the largest non-articulated engine ever built. It ran twice as fast as the Mallets, yet used less fuel.
I really want to get down to Pomona to see it. 9000 itself still exists. It was probably at the time they shot this video, it was probably the only one left. But they made, I think, 87 or 88 of these 412-2 locomotives. And they're triple cylinder, just ridiculous. And though most of their life they basically spent running across Nebraska, where it is, big and open and straight track, they did actually run the 9000 under steam to Pomona where it's displayed. So it made it to California through the curves with this many drivers. I really want to see one of these engines and get to look at it. So I'll have to get down to LA at one of these points, because ever since I heard about these engines when I was a kid, it's like, that is the coolest choo-choo of all time.
Thousands served well on the plains where rails curved gently. But in mountain country, where winding tracks resisted stiff-legged engines, their efficiency and power were impaired.
Even with 12 drivers for adhesion, it'll still slip.
So, as early as 1936, using roller bearings and better steels, we revived the articulated type locomotive. The result was the famous Challenger.
And that one's clapped. Look at it.
Unlike the Mallets, the Challengers and their later somewhat refined cousins, the 3900 class, used only high-pressure steam in both sets of equal-sized cylinders. They seemed the final answer to the railroader's dream. But with the threat of World War II, still more was asked of the railroads. A greater hauling capacity was needed, and even these locomotives were found wanting. Big Boy was born of necessity.
That's a fun cut
now
in the video.
The stretching of the locomotive had reached its maximum. Where the Challengers and 3900s had 2 sets of 6 drivers, Big Boy had 2 groups of 8. Like its forerunners, it had four-wheel trucks under the front cylinders to lead it through the curves, and under the cab to support the huge firebox. Whether it was booming along at 80 or drifting easy, Big Boy radiated majesty.
I would love to know, because it's always quoted that their top speed was 80 mile an hour or something like that. I would love to know if one of them ever actually got to that speed in service, because you look at UP's documentation and they did so much locomotive science. If you start looking around for it, it's actually really cool, the different experiments they did and every test they did to try and make the locomotives as good as they could. It was part of the way how they determined how to minimize back pressure between the blast nozzle and the cylinders themselves, which is part of the reason why engines like 844 have two stacks but only the one engine itself. So limiting back pressure meant that for the same size of drivers, you could get more RPMs out of them and run the thing even faster. So there's a lot of data about just how quick and how much tonnage these engines would run and at what speeds over the territories they did. But I want to say that the average speed they did was more like 35 to 40, and I kind of doubt that they ever really would have gone 80 in service. But I don't know. Maybe there's a record out there. If you know, let me know in the comments down below.
And compact. A solid workhorse, yet limber as a trotter, magnificence was paired with performance. The 4000s were the largest and heaviest of their type ever built, 132 feet long, 1.25 million pounds in weight. Every inch of Big Boy had the look of irresistible force. Enough, in fact, to pull a loaded 5.5-mile long train on level track.
And the note there, 5.5-mile train, that is with smaller and lighter cars than what we use today. So that's one of those things that you hear the statistic and you go, oh my god, that's like the length of most, or that's even longer than most precision scheduled railroad trains, thinking about it. The biggest that PRS kind of trains get, did I say PRS? They're a guitar manufacturer. PSR trains get to typically, it's about 16,000 feet, which is a little over 3 miles, and metric conversions somewhere up there for the rest of you guys. And so 5.5 miles is considerably longer than even that. Though, I mean, when you're talking about 40 and 50 foot box cars, they're not 100 tons per car like some of the cars we have today. And obviously, I think that would be empty cars. But, anything to make the number sound bigger.
Big Boy also furnished power to check the hurtling tons behind it. A common sight on trains descending Sherman Hill was a swirl of smoke streaming from every wheel as the brakes were applied, energized by compressed air from the locomotive.
You gonna change that brake shoe, guys? Jesus. That thing's almost into the brake head. There's not much shoe left. That's kind of hilarious, but also very typical for the railroad.
There was a family resemblance about Big Boy and the 3900. Heavy jowled with bulky cylinders, each had a bright eye low on a double chin of air compressors. The bell was a forelock, the pilot like a steel beard. A 3900 carried our familiar shield in the center of it.
Hey, look, he's changing the train assignments on the train boards right there. That's fun.
Face like smokebox front, Big Boy below the headlight. A distinguishing feature
One of the
this
coolest
type
shots.
of articulated locomotive was the reluctant manner in which the long, rigid boiler followed the front free-swinging engine unit around a curve.
What a feat of engineering.
Little double-jointed locomotive had come a long way. In fact, all locomotives had long before disproved early 19th century scoffers who had said smooth driving wheels on smooth rails would spin futilely. They hadn't considered adhesion supplied by the engine's weight. Although nearly 3/4 of Big Boy's tonnage was on its 68-inch drivers, tractive power sometimes overcame even this force.
That specific sound right there, right after the wheel slip, and it starts to get the ba-dump, ba-dump, ba-dump rhythm. that was what was so nostalgic for me when I did another reaction video to when the 4014, the big boy that runs today, had to help out that stalled freight, because it's shoving on the end of this freight train, hauling its train too. And they're marching up over the grade, and you just get the ba-dum, 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 and it's like, oh, it sounds just like Blast of the Giants. It was really, really cool. So just a fun sound from a simple articulated locomotive like that, because the two driver sets will go in and out of sync depending on if they slip or all that. So very, very cool to hear.
4 cylinders, each larger than a 40-gallon oil drum, powered the 16 drivers. Steam at 300 pounds pressure was distributed to the cylinders by valves timed with a mechanical device that created a...
I would love to see how the heck they mounted whatever cameras they had back in the day for this, because it's not like they were slapping a GoPro on a stick on the side of the locomotive like I can these days.
Fascinating counterpoint in motion. The engineer controlled this complicated valve mechanism and could change the direction of travel with an auxiliary machine, the reverse gear. Life in Big Boy began in the firebox, a high-efficiency furnace so large that a human fireman could hardly shovel enough coal into it to make steam for the whistle.
They're joking, and there are many a story from Train Crew about, oh god, the stoker broke and I had to fire it. You would not be able to keep up with any variety of tonnage train manually shoveling. And if the stoker breaks, you still have the jets on the table plate itself, so you can dump the coal right inside the door and it would blow everything everywhere. But having been inside the 4005's firebox, it is huge. I mean, it literally, with the grates in it, if I was not wearing my steel-toed boots, I would fit between the grates and the crown sheet. So it's one Hyce tall in there, basically. And it's something like 22 feet long. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. That's like 6.5 or close to 7 meters. Like, just ridiculous. You would have a heck of a time trying to keep up with this thing.
Mechanical stoker clawed fuel from the tender, passed it by an Archimedes screw to the firebox, then sewed it across the fire.
Yeah, you can see the jets blowing the coal everywhere.
In the steel boiler, water circulated around more than a mile of tubes and flues that carried a red-hot hurricane to generate...
Look, they've simplified it to not show superheat for the sake of the drawing. That's funny. Yeah, you'd go to the superheater header here, and then you'd run down the tube, back again, back again, back again, and then back up to the header, and then down to everything else. But getting that concept across is a little bit more challenging, I suppose.
...generate and superheat the steam. With Big Boy's size, 2 stacks were needed. Hoods to deflect the smoke and permit a clear view from the cab often were used by the engineer.
So that shot left me with a belief that I was wrong about for the longest time, and it's come up on a couple videos because they got it working on the 4014 and they will use it, which is just fun to watch. You shunk, and then all the smoke goes back. In the shot specifically in Last of the Giants, you just see the one side come up. It's like, oh, you could deflect it left or right. No, the engineer only has one valve, and it brings both sides up. For maintenance purposes, where this guy is on top of the locomotive, there's valves there so you can shut off power to one of the 2 sides so that you can test and maintain them individually. But the engineer has no control over that while he's running out on the railroad.
Most of a steam locomotive's life was spent in or near its own special den, the Roundhouse.
And why can't we still have roundhouses like this that are almost a full circle? I don't know. I'm wondering what the biggest roundhouse that's left in the U.S. is, because there are several, and Lord knows I worked in one that was about that big. Was originally 25 stalls, but you know, I don't know if there's any that are like a true whole circle all the way around that exist.
Though sturdy and reliable, even Big Boy often needed attention and service. Better than most engines, its availability for pulling trains still was relatively low.
steam engine.
Roundhouse rights began at the end of the run when the fire was dumped and the grates cleaned and cooled. A never-ending job was that of removing ashes cleared from Big Boy's garage-sized firebox.
It is
Good
garage-sized.
maintenance required frequent washing to flush away the grit and grease that always gathered on a steam engine. The locomotive first was pushed through a shower, then finished by hand. After a round of inspection that included a search for leaking steam connections, Big Boy was ready for the roundhouse. Once inside, the engine might be there only a few hours while the boiler was emptied and washed. But if heavy repairs were needed...
Only there for a few hours to wash out the boiler. I mean, we look at that and go, these days in preservation, because we don't have Cheyenne, Wyoming's boiler shop anymore. You know, I mean, if you just dumped the fire out of one of these engines and let it cool off, it would probably be a week before it had no steam in it still. And that is the best thing for the boiler, is to let it slowly change, because rapid expansion and contraction is how you build cracks and how you break stuff. And, well, back in the day, they had a team of Boilermakers and they didn't care. So I'm sure that they would bring it in, you know, blow the steam out, open up valves, and, you know, probably open a blowdown, totally drain the boiler, do the wash, fill it back up, and fire it up with house steam and have it ready to go pretty quick. But that's a frightening prospect, at least for those of us in the modern times.
It went to the back shop for perhaps a month.
Also, where can I get a crane that can lift an entire locomotive boiler frame, everything off of the other engine set? The darn thing weighs like 600 tons, so, I mean, okay, maybe 550 without the front engine unit, but, like, good lord, that's a shop.
It was disassembled with the aid of a heavy-duty crane.
No kidding.
One task was fitting Big Boy with new shoes, steel tires for its drivers, a periodic precision job for back shop machinists with special skills and tools.
That is a big VTL.
After being machined, the tire was ready for mounting. It had been bored about 1/8 of an inch smaller than the diameter of the wheel center. In a spectacular operation, it was made to fit. Gas flames heated and expanded the tire until it was larger than the wheel.
I've always wanted to do this. It's so funny to me. It's like, okay, precision machined, big thing. You put it on the vertical turret lathe. You did all the work and love. You heat it up, and then how do you put it on? You beat it with a hammer. Welcome to steam locomotives.
After the tire was driven into place, and before it cooled and shrank to grip the wheel securely, it was gauged for correct position. In another part of the shop, the pipe fitters would be busy with Big Boy's boiler. Tubes and flues, as well as another mile of piping that made up the superheater, often had to be repaired or replaced.
You can see the stack extensions are off of it in this, because the petticoat pipe and everything would be down. And what we saw in 4005 in the video when we went inside it, you could see all the baffling and everything's out. So there's the superheater units and all that madness.
There were very few small parts on a 4000. The tools were equally large and heavy, and the work was hard. It was a rare breed who maintained these giants, like the foreman who retired after spending his entire working life in a roundhouse, then returned to visit nearly every day, like the machinist who set valves on Big Boys all day, then spent much of the evening building a model railroad at home.
Perverted every single one of them, and I'm right there with them.
To ready a locomotive for the road, once the fire had been rekindled and the boiler was full of steam, all that remained to be done was to add fuel and water. Into the elephantine tender were tumbled 28 tons of coal, enough to heat the average house for many seasons. For the thirsty boiler, the 86-ton tender also carried 25,000 gallons of water, more than enough for a good...
86 tons has to be light. 86 tons for the big boy tender. That has to be without coal and water, because 491, our little K-37, just like that one, its tender is 60 tons, but that's loaded. So yeah, that's got to be an empty figure, because the big boy's tender is gargantuan, unsurprisingly.
Good-sized home swimming pool. With a heavy train, a 4000 often went through most of its food and drink within the first half of a 57-mile trip over Sherman Hill.
Yeah, why is it so big? Because it needs it. Spoilers.
It took many people many hours to return Big Boy to the job of moving freight over the main line. Standing docile as the running orders were read, only the quick-breathing fire, the droning generator, and the clanking, wheezing air pumps bespoke its latent power. But once the engineer on his hero throne had cracked the throttle to start the tons a-rolling, it took some doing to hold Big Boy back.
So funny sometimes what you expect a locomotive to do and what it actually does. Watch the stack in this clip again. So they start working it, and it's got a really, really clean stack.
Some doing to hold Big Boy back.
And I mean, it's mostly just steam. You can see how cold it is out, with all how white the steam is and everything. But it takes it a couple chuffs, and then all of a sudden it starts rolling black. Like, oh, it finally lit the coal and is trying to ignite the rest of it. And now it's making smoke. Always funny. And we're getting more orders hooped up. I've been on the receiving end of that before. It's fun. Engineer's not going to read his orders. Bad kid. At least we're not going to get to see it.
Big Boy was a king of the rails who came to life in a fusion of steam and steel. He proclaimed his presence with a rhythmic cough and a throaty cry, belching smoke and trailing steam. He pounded through his domain with a flashing and spinning of rods and wheels. His was an awesome majesty, but he was the last of his line to be toppled by new monarchs of the track. In the 18 years that the big boys reigned, they ran up a total of nearly 26 million miles, hauling billions of tons of freight as prime movers along our wartime lifeline, later carrying the goods of peace and a rising economy. During his final years, Big Boy made his last stand on a short but busy section of our main line, tough, demanding Sherman Hill, and then it was only during the annual fall rush, a few weeks a year. Even as the last wisps of steam were vanishing from railroading's yesterday, Big Boy's successors were ushering in a speed and space-hungry era. He gave way as electronics, jet power, and the atom were put to work on the iron trail. So Big Boy marked the end of big steam railroading in the West. He was not abandoned because he failed at what he was designed to do, but because a more efficient breed of iron horse appeared in the evolution of railroad locomotives. The vital link between East and West that was forged with steam engines is made even stronger today with modern motive power. The day has no end for the railroad, but whatever locomotive progress shall put at the head of tomorrow's train, the rumble and roar of Big Boy will seem still to echo from the high country of southern Wyoming.
You know, it's funny. It's one of those things. It's a well-produced documentary, and, you know, of course it starts waxing poetic at the end, and me being the utter sap that I am, I'm like, it's so sad they got rid of the big choo-choo. Much like how, eventually when I get there, I promise I'm still working on the Little Engines, Big Men audiobook. I get to the end of this book, the end of this documentary, and each time I find myself sad, it's like, well, no more choo-choos. Now knowing, of course, that we're so fortunate that the 4014 runs. I remember growing up and it was like, you'd watch this documentary and it was like, yeah, and it's a bummer. They'll never have one run ever again. You know, they're too big. It won't fit. It's too heavy. The whole 9 yards. And now, of course, ever since, 29, I guess it's been 5 or 6 years it's already been in service. I remember hearing, you know, over 10 years ago, and they said, oh yeah, no, we're going to go get the 4014 and we're going to run it. It's like, oh, everyone likes that. So just a cool thing. And so it's like, oh, it's the end, it's set. But wait, hang on. 8 of them got preserved. 1 of them runs. Like, and nobody ever imagined that could have happened. So we're in a very good state. Much like in the book, it's like, oh yeah, they talk about the end of the narrow gauge and whatever. And it's like, yeah, but like almost all of the K36s run and blah, 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 blah. Like, you don't need to be sad. Yes, the common carrier era of all that is done, but we're so very blessed that we have all the things in preservation that we do. So anyways, that was Last of the Giants. I hope you enjoyed my little takes and commentary and extra little tidbits. And as always, thank you so much for watching. We'll catch y'all next time.